All right, thanks for tuning into the Ourlads Football Radio Network, Week 8 College Football Preview Edition. We've got two big games to kick off the show. Michigan, Penn State, white out at Happy Valley. And the big USC Notre Dame rivalry. 6-1 Trojans, 5-1 Irish. We'll take a look at all the key games this week, the latest trends, odds, injury reports, and picks. As OFN on PSN starts now. All right, thanks for tuning in. Friday, another Friday for college football. Week's already underway, week 8. A couple of games. Actually, there's a few games tonight. But another Saturday where we just, we really don't have like a huge day, where you go, wow, look at all these really big key games going on in college football. Now, that means that they're coming. They'll be here soon. But there's still a lot going on, and we're going to be here for about a half hour. And we've got a lot to cover. So stay with us. By the way, if you're an NFL fan and you want to check out our preview from Thursday, that's on demand and ready to go. Tony Mejia and I broke down every game in the NFL. So you can check out the preview there on demand over at ourlads.com. Okay, so let's get right to it. The two big games this week, Michigan, Penn State, USC, Notre Dame. Michigan 5-1, Penn State 6-0. Of course, you know what I think about Penn State. They've been my preseason national championship team. They moved up to number 2 in the poll. I still think that when it's all said and done, we're going to have Penn State and Wisconsin. I've said that for weeks. In the Big Ten championship game, the winner will be in the playoffs. So that does include Wisconsin. So if Wisconsin can win that's why we took Wisconsin as a sleeper a couple of weeks ago. I think at the time they were about 35-1 to win the national championship. Now, we also talked about how this was going to be a very tough schedule for Penn State, and this is when it starts. It's Michigan at home, and it just shows you the importance of this game for Penn State in a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons is because after this home game, they go back-to-back on the road at Ohio State, at Michigan State. And as we've talked about this the last couple of weeks, with Penn State's situation and trying to just get to the playoffs, they know what happened last year. They had 2 losses. It kept them out of the playoffs, even though they won the Big Ten championship game. So they know that they can lose one game, but as long as they get and win the Big Ten championship, they'll go to the playoffs this year. I mean, that's a certainty. But you just lose one game. The question is, if they do lose one game, and more than likely it would be in these next 3 weeks, which one do you think it'll be, and which one do you think they can lose more of? And keep in mind, Ohio State's loss was against Oklahoma, so it wasn't a Big Ten game. And if Ohio State beats Penn State next week, there's a really good chance that Ohio State could wind up in the Big Ten championship game, not Penn State. And as we've talked many times about, I don't care what happens with Ohio State. Like, for instance, let's say Ohio State beats Penn State, and then somehow, because they only have one loss, and let's say Penn State runs the table, say because there's a 3-way tie or something, maybe we'll throw in Michigan State, I guess, and let's say Ohio State gets to the Big Ten championship game, and Penn State doesn't lose again. Imagine the reverse actually does happen that we talked about last year and a lot this year, and Ohio State wins a Big Ten championship with 2 losses, and Penn State sitting there with 1 loss. Who do you think would go to the playoffs if they had to choose, Penn State or Ohio State? You know the answer to that. You know it. It's Ohio State. You know it. So you don't want to lose to Ohio State for Penn State, even though you beat them last year and still didn't make the playoffs. But just win that game. I mean, if you're going to lose a game, I really do think the game to lose is either this week or against Michigan State. No, I don't think it's going to be this week, though. Look, you know what I think about Michigan. It's my favorite team, of course, outside of my home state of Rutgers. They have nothing going on at quarterback. I've said it for a week. Look, I've said this since last season. Okay, I knew Michigan wasn't going to amount to anything as far as a national championship team, as long as Wilton Speight was there. I kept saying, well, unless Speight can turn around and be a Jake Coker and get hot. Well, sure didn't get hot against Ohio State, did he? And okay, well, maybe, another year being the number one quarterback and he should get better, right? No. And by the way, it's obvious now he never would have been replaced because Harbaugh can't even replace O'Korn, who's been awful. And you have two big-time recruits sitting there in Peters and McCaffrey. Now, McCaffrey's got the red shirt you don't want to burn, so I get that. I really do. But if Peters, what are you doing with Peters here now? Now you're in a situation where you got yourself like a big-time high school recruit guy who's got a big arm. And what are you going to do? You're going to put him in a situation where what? You're telling me that he's that bad in practice? We're going to go over this practice thing again? Is he really that bad? Because I saw a spring game that he outplayed Wilton Speight and John O'Korn. So I don't want to hear about practice. All I know is the only time that Peters played in any sort of game that we watched on TV in the spring, Peters was the better quarterback. And that's not good enough for Jim Harbaugh to start him, as bad as O'Korn's been. So you know what's going to happen? O'Korn is going to get killed tomorrow night. Because Penn State has the 9th-ranked pass defense, their 9th-ranked total defense. We've touted this defense all season, better than last year's defense. They were 37th overall. You throw in, we've talked a lot about Marcus Allen. We've talked recently now about Grant Haley, the corner, and I mentioned that just to let you know that, okay, yes, Karen Higdon had 200 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns last week. Okay, fine. He's not a freshman. He's not a redshirt sophomore. This kid's a junior. Now, I don't know. Maybe Higdon's the best running back on the team. It wouldn't surprise me. Because normally if you're a junior and you're sitting behind running backs that really aren't doing the job, well, I guess there's a reason for that, right? Apparently not, because Higdon went out there, got an opportunity to play, 200 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns. So how do we know now all of a sudden Higdon is some sort of big-time running back now? And that is what Michigan, that's the only chance Michigan has tomorrow night. Turnovers, special teams, and Higdon having another big game and all of a sudden being a big part of this offense for the rest of his career. That's it. Only shot. And wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't that be telling if Higdon did all of a sudden turn into a really good running back? Just like we've been talking about the quarterback situation at Michigan. It's going to take another injury. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take O'Korn going down. That's what I've been saying as a Jet fan for the past 3 seasons, having to sit behind Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh McCown. It's going to take an injury. Some of these coaches are just stubborn. They won't go to the inexperienced quarterback. And what did we say a few weeks ago about Deshaun Watson? Don't forget, Deshaun Watson got the job at Houston over Savage. Why? Because Savage got hurt. That's why. Watson came in, showed he was a little bit effective, and that was enough. But you know what? Savage started week 1. What would have happened if Savage started week 1 for Houston and he went like 11 of 15, no interceptions. They ran the ball for 200 yards, and they won that game against Jacksonville. What do you think happens? I'll tell you what happens. Savage starts the next week. What happens then if Savage and Houston continue to win more than they lose? Just like, say, what's going on with the Jets or what's going on with Michigan because they are 5-1. I'll tell you what happens. Savage still starts. And we never get to see Deshaun Watson. It's sad that it comes to that, but that's the reason you should jump all over Penn State tomorrow night. Favorite by 9.5, and I'll tell you another reason to take them, because last year, Michigan beat them up. And this is college. And in college, they like their revenge. Not only did Penn State get beat up last year 49-10 at Michigan, but they've lost 3 straight to Michigan. And that means that there are some seniors in Penn State who have never beaten Michigan. And there's also a junior who's never beaten Michigan. Best player in college football, Saquon Barkley. Now, he's going to have a great test going up against this Michigan defense. There ain't no question about that. But keep this in mind. Michigan's defense, as good as it is, and is good. The best offense they've faced this year, the best, Air Force. I mean, Florida has a pathetic quarterback situation, as we know. I mean, Indiana, Cincinnati, even Purdue has nothing at quarterback. There hasn't been any tests really for Michigan. Nothing yet. 9.5 points to me. I don't think it's a whole lot to ask for. I understand Michigan's got a great defense. I understand that they don't usually get blown out or anything like that. But keep in mind, the one time this team did get blown out was against Ohio State a couple years ago. Harbaugh's first season, last game. And it's happened before. And it'll happen again on Saturday night. I'd be very surprised if it didn't. And I would kind of be a little bit down on Penn State. As much as I've liked them all season, and it's going to take a lot for me not to pick them as my national championship team since they've been my top team all season. But I would be down on them if they weren't able to beat Michigan, where they have the ball in the fourth quarter, not needing to run the clock out. I'd be a little bit disappointed because John O'Korn is terrible. They're a one-dimensional team. The game's at home. You have revenge, national TV, whiteout. You should be able to handle Michigan. The other big game is also, by the way, it figures the top 2 games on Saturday are both Saturday night, roughly the same time. Don't you love that? That's why I love DVRs. USC Notre Dame. See, because these games are so big, though, I'm going to have to watch the college games on the DVR like I watch the NFL games, which is I'm going to have to watch like one every 15, 20 minutes. And make sure I don't fast forward through too much at certain times. Like if I have to fast forward like a down or two or something, right after a play, because they may go to a commercial or they may go to a highlight break, which I never get. Why they actually go to highlights of other games that are taking place on other networks. Does that make any sense? Hey, let's tell you what's going on in the Michigan-Penn State game. This way, if you want, you can change the channel. But that's how I'm going to have to deal with it. Notre Dame, 3.5-point favorite, and I'm all over the Irish here. Now, if USC wakes up and starts playing like the team that we thought they would be when the season started, which they haven't played like since the season started, and they get on a roll, and all of a sudden, we're in a few weeks, we're going, that's who we were talking about. All right, well, if that happens starting Saturday night, well, then they're going to have to prove it. And that could happen. I mean, look what happened last night. I didn't pick the game, but I talked about this with Tony on the show yesterday, that I can't take Oakland until Oakland proves that they can actually start looking like the team that we thought they were going to be when the season began. And there you go. Now, it took, of course, a crazy way to end the game and, a couple of lucky situations, but hey, they persevered, something they haven't done this year, and they won. So will USC do that on Saturday night? Well, statistically speaking, on average, teams don't prove it. So I'm willing to go back right again in that situation and say, prove it, USC. Hey, if you beat me, you beat me. And then, you know what? To me, I think this is a good enough opponent. I know a lot of people weren't really excited about the Irish this season. I get that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they don't have that dynamic type of passing game that they usually have under Kelly, the Kaisers of the world. But they're just better now. I mean, they have the 5th-ranked rush offense in the country. They've got Ourlads, top-rated senior offensive tackle, and Mike McGlinchey. They've got Josh Adams, who I've raved about all season. You combine Adams with Brandon Wimbush, who's healthy at quarterback. They've combined for over 1,100 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns. Matter of fact, Notre Dame has 23 rushing touchdowns. And what's going to help them in this game are the injuries to USC. Now, starting nose tackle Josh Fatu is out. So they're going to go into a situation where they're going to be playing a true freshman at nose tackle, Brandon Peely. They also have Rasheem Green, who should play, we're hearing, but he's been dealing with his ankle injury since the Washington State game. He's not 100%. Redshirt freshman defensive end Liam Jimmins, he's going to get some reps. He should get some major reps, actually, maybe even start. Linebacker Port Augustin's out. And this is going up against Notre Dame's offensive line, McGlinchey, the rushing offense. I'm sorry, that's asking for a lot for USC in this situation. So they're going to have to score. Now, Sam Darnold, who hasn't had the greatest season so far, has played better recently. 674 over his last 2 games passing, 6 touchdowns, 1 pick. He's still not the quarterback that anybody expected him to be. Boy, I think, didn't someone on this network talk about that in the beginning of the season? Something about Jets tanking for Sam Darnold, and I don't know. There's just an awful lot of national media people that were talking about the Jets tanking for Sam Darnold. We even saw every time they show a USC game, you'd see some dork with a Sam Darnold Jet jersey. And of course, the funny, ironic thing is if Sam Darnold actually decides to come out and he doesn't play like much better than he's playing like right now, Jets might get Sam Darnold. But you know what they'll get him? They'll probably get him, I don't know, maybe 8th or 10th pick in the draft. Because the Jets ain't going to get the first pick in the draft this year. That's right. That's why. And that's why you don't tank. He's just too young. You didn't have enough tape on him. I think Dan Shonka has him as like 4th quarterback, I believe, behind Rosen, Allen, and Mayfield. He should come back. But look, you got half the season, so get it going. Prove it. By the way, USC's got the 61st ranked rush defense, and that's going up against that Notre Dame rushing offense. Notre Dame, by the way, has been playing much better than expected compared to USC, which has been very disappointing. What you got to do is look at the spreads to see that, the trend spreads. The Trojans have dropped 5 straight covers. Notre Dame has covered 4 straight. Matter of fact, since losing to Georgia, one of our other national championship picks from a few weeks ago, what do we get Georgia at? 16-1 or something like that. And we're feeling pretty good about having Penn State, Wisconsin, and Georgia right now, I'll tell you that. But Notre Dame, since the 1-point loss to Georgia, 4-0, straight up and against the spread. They have been, because, again, that's why early in the season, you kind of look at that game and you're going, yeah, but Georgia's got a freshman quarterback, and yeah, it's Georgia, and they've kind of underachieved over the years, and we know Notre Dame's not very good, and yeah, this isn't, and it's okay, 1 point. Well, neither of these teams going anywhere. A few weeks later, what do you think about that? It turns out to be a pretty good loss for Notre Dame. So I'll take Notre Dame -3 against USC. And by the way, the home team in this series, because they play every year, the home team has won 4 straight. Okay, let's I tell you what, let's go to the SEC now. We're going to go conference by conference. We're going to go to the top conference games of note. SEC, now this is a game that I am going to seriously consider as a outright upset pick, and that is Arkansas against Auburn. I'm just completely done with Auburn because Jarrett Stidham I'm trying to think of who he reminds me of. He kind of reminds me of maybe Sam Bradford would be a good one. Somebody that has a really high completion percentage, but that's it. Doesn't win big games. That kind of thing. That's probably the best thing I can kind of think of. Best comparison. And then throw in the fact that the Auburn receivers are terrible. I mean, every time Stidham was able to get the ball anywhere near the receivers down the field, they dropped the pass. I mean, they gave the game last week to LSU. Because with Auburn such a good defense, LSU has nothing on offense except Geis. And Geis wasn't having a great game. So what did they do? They gave a punt return touchdown to get things going for LSU. And I just think Auburn's confidence right now, I think overall, when you lose two games already on the season, your chances of a national championship, which is their goal, SEC championship, are pretty thin right now. I will say this, though, keep this in mind, that Auburn, even though they have lost 2 games, now I'm not saying this because I'm telling you to take Auburn because I don't believe in them, and they're not going to win the national championship, and they're not even going to play in the SEC championship game. But if you are an Auburn fan, keep in mind, if Auburn runs the table, beats Alabama, the chances are extremely good that they're going to wind up playing in the SEC championship game. And if Auburn were to win the SEC championship game, imagine an SEC champion not in the playoffs. So there you go. And I only mention that really because psychologically, Auburn should be saying that to themselves. Our season is not over. But I this is just one of those things where Arkansas is a 5-1 dog. I know Austin Allen's most likely not going to play, still banged up, but I don't care. This Cole Kelly kid, if you haven't seen him yet, he's 6'7", 270. But he's got a good arm. First start last week against Alabama on the road. And you know what? He didn't play awful. You go to Alabama as a redshirt freshman in your first start on the road, and you are okay. I mean, he was just okay. He wasn't very good. He wasn't bad. That's impressive to me. And as Olin Buchanan said yesterday, I interviewed him from TexAgs.com, Texas A&M writer, columnist. He mentioned a big season from Jonathan Nance, the receiver from Arkansas. He's come out of nowhere to have a big season. Nance is a JC transfer who's really helped out that passing game. And how about this? This is the first SEC home game. We're into October 21st, the first SEC home game for Arkansas. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Hogs to win the game outright. Why not? I always have a few of these. Last week, one of them hit with Arizona State, so I'll take Arkansas in this one as a 5-1 dog, getting 16 against Auburn. They also got a little bit of revenge on their minds too. I mean, Auburn destroyed them last year, 56-3. Also in the SEC, another game that I am very much considering as another money line play is Ole Miss against LSU, getting 7, a little bit more than 2-1 straight up. I mean, LSU has had a couple of big games back to back, good wins, Florida, Auburn, again, all defense and special teams. But hey, I'm just bringing it up because these are big wins back to back. So emotionally, having to go back on the road now, this is tough. Now, Ole Miss, this is what Ole Miss lives for. They're under probation. This is all they live for, these games. And they got some confidence going last week. Patterson had a big game. A.J. Brown had a big game. That's a lethal sophomore combination quarterback receiver. Patterson is 3rd nationally, 357 yards a game. A.J. Brown is 4th nationally, 113 yards a game. That's a very nice combination. And keep in mind, too, LSU is dealing with injuries along their offensive line. Now, Mississippi's got a couple of guys on defense, Marquise Haynes, DeMarquise Gates. Not that they're a big defensive team, because they're not. They haven't been very good this year. I'm just letting you know that, because if Ole Miss can stop the running game and LSU can't find a way to run the ball, which they need to do, and Ole Miss, because they're an offensive team, can put some points up on the board. KJ Malone's out. Malone is, I think he's top 12 rated senior offensive guard, even though he's playing tackle for LSU. But Dan's got him ranked as coming out as a guard in the NFL draft as a senior. He's the son of Karl Malone. and he's out. And matter of fact, they started 2 true freshmen last week on the offensive line. 3 of them may be playing significant time in the game at Ole Miss. So I'm going to go ahead and say that knowing how big these games are for Ole Miss, really, if you take a look at the rest of the schedule for Ole Miss, this is the last big game for them until the Egg Bowl at Mississippi State. So I'll take the Rebels as a nice little upset here because I still don't believe in LSU and Ed Orgeron. Okay, now let's go to the Big Ten, and a couple of games there of note. Indiana at Michigan State. Michigan State is trying to make a statement. Things aren't as bad as everybody thought it were going to be, and I know they just keep winning, and good for them. But look, I'm still not overly impressed. The only thing I am impressed about is for a team that doesn't have a lot of talent, they're winning. And I know D'Antonio's a good coach. There ain't no doubt about that. Now, I don't agree with what he's doing here this week. LJ Scott, who didn't play in the Michigan game, played last week against Minnesota. Career high 194 yards rushing. Okay? Now, Scott was arrested this week on his 7th charge for driving without a license. Now, there's this confusion about, well, but the other charges were taken care of, says D'Antonio, and blah, blah, blah. So he's going to play against Indiana. I don't understand that. I really don't. I mean, he had a lot of issues in the summer with some of these players that are no longer on this team. I don't understand why. I mean, maybe there's something I don't know. But the explanation that he gives doesn't convince me. Well, that's all been taken care of. I mean, that's not an excuse. Look, if you were arrested for not driving with a license, valid license, suspended license, then you shouldn't be driving. You're in a campus environment. What's the need to drive if you have an issue with your license? Stay on campus, stay in school. You don't have to drive. That's the one thing you shouldn't do if you've been suspended 6 other times. Or charged 6 other times. But that's okay for D'Antonio. It's okay. No problem. Now, I don't know what that's going to do for this game because you know what? I'm a little bit surprised Michigan State's only a 6.5-point favorite. It's homecoming. Look, they've clearly been better than Indiana. But keep in mind, Michigan State was pretty ugly last week, that game. They had 5 turnovers in the game. Indiana, they had the near upset win against Michigan. Peyton Ramsey had a couple of big drives at the end of regulation to get that game in overtime until Higdon's touchdown run won it for the Wolverines. And so it looks like Peyton Ramsey might be the quarterback moving forward for Indiana. Remember the Lago had that huge game against Ohio State to begin the season? 410 yards passing. And that was it. It's one game. Now it's Ramsey's team. So I don't know. I mean, I'll probably stay away from that game. I'm tempted to go with the money line because I went with it last week with Indiana against Michigan, and they almost won the game. It went to overtime. So I'm kind of tempted to go back to Indiana, even though, again, Michigan State's the better team. It's a small spread. You would think Michigan State is a good play here. And maybe they are. I don't know. But that's something I'm going to have to think about. But again, that's a key game for Michigan State if they believe that they are really a contender for the Big Ten Championship, because soon they'll be playing a 3-week stretch after this week where they go to Northwestern, and then they get Penn State at home and Ohio State on the road. Now, maybe they get an advantage by getting Penn State at home, as we mentioned, with Penn State having those 2 games before that game. But if they lose to Indiana this week, Michigan State, forget any of those dreams about a Big Ten championship game. Iowa Northwestern, this is a big game in this division here in the Big Ten, which is the West Division, because Iowa is right now coming off a bye week, so they've had a little bit of time to prepare for this game. and they've got the loss to Michigan State and Penn State in back-to-back weeks. So with Wisconsin in this division, the chances are extremely slim that they're going to be able to win this division. The only way that can happen is Wisconsin's going to have to lose one game besides Iowa going into Camp Randall and winning. So it's not looking good for Iowa. For Northwestern, Justin Jackson became the school's all-time leading rusher last week, surpassing Damian Anderson in their comfortable win over Maryland. So I kind of like Northwestern in this one. I'm a little bit surprised they're a very small dog in this one. Yeah, I am. I'm kind of surprised about that. And as far as Northwestern, they're also same. I mean, they're actually in worse shape than Iowa because they've already lost to Wisconsin. So these are just basically two teams playing for going to a bowl and pride and all that. But I like Northwestern in that one. Not a lot. Should be a real tough game though. Okay, let's go to the Pac-12. And tell you what, let's talk about. We had Demario Richard on the show. We interviewed him yesterday, actually, one-on-one on the OFN meeting room. So that's available on demand. And Arizona State coming off the big win against Washington. Big win the last few years for the Arizona State program. Now, will it be a 1 week kind of win deal, or is this the beginning of something really good here for Arizona State? And I don't think last week was the beginning, because if you look, Arizona State has won 2 out of 3, and in that span, they beat Oregon, and that was when they had Justin Herbert. The week before that, they had a close loss to Texas Tech, and Tech's had a good season. They had a close loss to San Diego State, and they had a close loss to Stanford. So this has been a good season for Arizona State. Manny Wilkins has been playing better at quarterback for the Sun Devils. I think 10 points is a lot. I think the reason Utah is a 10-point favorite here is maybe they're thinking, well, Arizona State got that out of their system and they'll have a big letdown. Okay, I mean, I'm willing to buy that, but I just don't think Utah is a 10-point better team than Arizona State. I just don't. Now, maybe Tyler Huntley comes back for Utah, the quarterback. We've talked a lot about his injury situation the last few weeks. He hasn't played. So last year's starter, senior Troy Williams, has played, even though he almost beat USC last week. Fact is, they lost, and he didn't really have a great game. So I know that they're not saying Huntley's going to start for sure. Maybe he won't, but if he's available, maybe we see him, especially if Arizona State takes the lead in this one. Because Huntley is just a better player. But Utah has lost the last 2 weeks by a combined 4 points. And look, Kyle Whittingham's a very good coach. No question about that. They get Arizona when they beat Arizona by 6 on the road earlier this season without Khalil Tate. So they really start the season off by not really playing anybody. But they've had 2 tough games, 2 good losses, but they've been losses. That's just a fact. They've been losses. So I think Arizona State might not be a crazy look. I had Arizona State last week as a 16-point dog money line play. So why wouldn't I just say thank you? I'll go with you again for another week. So Arizona State 3-1 dog in that one. Now, speaking of Tate in Arizona, we've probably talked about no other quarterback and their impact in college football for the last couple of weeks than Khalil Tate at Arizona. Just an incredible run going on there. We've talked many times about the fact that Rich Rodriguez, he needs a Denard Robinson type of quarterback to run his offense. And if he gets one, then they can have a great year offensively. And all of a sudden, he's got one. Tate's got 557 rushing in his 2 starts the last 2 weeks with 6 rushing touchdowns. He's also 21 of 26, 301 and 2 touchdowns passing. And to take on a Cal team coming up a big upset win last week against Washington State. Keep in mind that was a turnover fest for Washington State. They picked off Falk 5 times, but big loss for Cal. Justin Wilcox, we talked highly about the move to bring him in earlier this season for Cal, bringing some defense to Cal, and we saw that big time last week. But he loses his star linebacker, Devontae Downs, for the year with a leg injury from last week. Downs has been everything to Cal's defense. Leads them in tackles with 65. He's got 3 sacks, 2 interceptions. That's a big loss for Cal, especially the week that Khalil Tate comes to town. This one, look, I've gone with Arizona. I went with Arizona last week, big, after what Tate did the week before that. And I'm just going to stick with Tate until they lose. That's all I'm going to say. Arizona's a 3-point favorite on the road. Speaking of Washington State, now they've got a rebound, and you know what? They've got a tough schedule. The Cal game was not the game to lose, because after this game at home against Colorado, they're going to be at Arizona and Tate, Stanford at home, at Utah, at Washington. So Washington State, you can forget about a national championship now season for them, because you can't lose to Cal if you're going to have one, especially with this upcoming schedule they're facing. Plus, to this week, Tavares Martin has been suspended, their leading receiver. He's got 37 receptions, 500 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Falk, we'll see how he rebounds from the 5-interception week. And Colorado, their opponent this week. Okay, probably a good week to play Colorado, because Colorado just hasn't had a great season. And we knew it would be a rebuilding year for Mike McIntyre after a big year last year. Key guys left the program. Few of them went to the NFL. But you know what? Besides the Washington game, they've either won or been in every game. I mean, they only lost by 4 to UCLA and 3 to Arizona. So, and it was just their bad luck that Khalil Tate came in the game because of the injury. So if Dawkins would have kept playing, I mean, they did the favor. They did the Jets Tom Brady favor, Bledsoe favor, where you injure the quarterback and the next guy comes in and he's a star. So anyway, Washington State favored by 10 in that one. And Oregon at UCLA, the Bruins are favored by 6.5. Josh Rosen, 3 interceptions in the loss to Arizona last week in his last 4 games. Rosen is just 8 touchdowns to 8 picks. So as Rosen has digressed after getting off to a good start, Sam Darnold has gotten a little bit better. See, you just don't know with these quarterbacks, especially these college quarterbacks. And look, Rosen doesn't have a whole lot to work with, kind of like what we're seeing with Josh Allen. We'll get to him in a little bit. Allen, of course, has less to work with at Wyoming. But Oregon, look, this is a game where I've had fun going against both teams the last couple of weeks, because Oregon has nothing going on at quarterback with Herbert out. Braxton Burmeister has not done anything, and he's going to start again this week. They've lost the last 2 games with Burmeister at quarterback by an 82-17 margin. Now, they have beaten the Bruins, the Oregon program, 6 straight times, but they haven't played since 2014. And UCLA has lost 3 out of 4. So this isn't a great game, but I mean, UCLA, 6-point favorite at home. Yeah, I mean, come on, you got to win this one, right? All right, Big 12, Oklahoma, 14-point favorite at Kansas State. And Oklahoma, I don't think Oklahoma's in 14. I'm looking at this money line at almost 5-1, and I'm thinking, I know Kansas State didn't come through last week against TCU, but you had the delays were ridiculous with the weather, and they had 2 turnovers in the red zone. Of course, Alex Delton is at quarterback now for Ertz, who's out. Yeah, Dalton didn't play well, 11 of 29. That's pretty bad, and he didn't run, and he needs to run. Overall, the Wildcats have lost 3 out of 4 now. So there's a lot of things I don't like about Kansas State, which is why I probably won't take them here. But Oklahoma, if you look at it, they've won 2 out of 3, but they haven't covered any of those games, which tells you they're just not playing very well. They barely got by Texas. And remember, they only beat Baylor a few weeks ago by 8, and Baylor's been getting killed by everybody. So I don't know what's going on with Oklahoma. So I'm just saying this game could be tricky for them. Anytime you go to Manhattan, take on Bill Snyder, you got to be wary because he sometimes is good for an upset once or twice a season. So watch out in that one if you're an Oklahoma fan. Oklahoma State, meanwhile, at Texas, favored by 7. This is a game that I don't know. I may stay away from. I'm kind of leaning towards thinking about Texas. Not sure if I'd go with them outright to win the game as a 7-point dog. James Washington, the number 2 senior receiver for Ourlads, had a big week last week, 235 yards receiving against Baylor. Texas, meanwhile, look, after the Maryland game, they have been a very spunky team. They've lost some really close games. They lost the USC game in overtime. They lost the Kansas State game. They won the Kansas State game in overtime. Then they lose the game last week to Oklahoma. You wonder if they're going to start running out of gas But they're spunky, and spunky teams are usually good teams to go with. By the way, Oklahoma State in their next 3 games, or next 2 games, are at West Virginia and then Oklahoma. So it's a very tough stretch here over the next 3 games for the Cowboys. Iowa State, Texas Tech's a good one. Texas Tech favored by 7 at home. Both of these teams have played better than people thought because they're both 5-1 against the spread this year. Kyle Kempt has done a great job in his 2 starts, taking over for Park, and he hasn't thrown a pick yet. Iowa State now 4-2, just like Texas Tech. So this is a big game. Texas Tech blew a 35-17 lead last week in Morgantown, and both teams have big games next week. Iowa State will host undefeated TCU, and Texas Tech will be at Oklahoma. But you know what? This may not be a bad play for Iowa State because they're playing a lot better, and they're about 240 on the money line. Okay, ACC, Louisville, Florida State. We thought this would be a tremendous game at the beginning of the season. Not so much. Both teams, I mean, get this, they're a combined 6-6 straight up, 1-9-2 against the spread. Is that not disappointment right there? Louisville losing to Boston College last week. FSU, I'm thinking of maybe going with them this week because don't forget last year they were humiliated. Louisville 63-20. In that matchup. And I'm trying to think if I remember. Yeah, I was trying to think about something, but anyway, at the time, Florida State was the second-ranked team in the country. That set up that big game with Clemson a few weeks later, which Clemson won. And, of course, the Lamar Jackson, this and that, and Heisman and all that. But anyway, I think Florida State may not be a bad play because at least even though their offense is still pretty weak, the freshman gets an opportunity to play more. They still have a very good defense, which probably could be good for a couple of Lamar Jackson turnovers. And again, revenge theme of the show. Maybe go that way. I'm a little bit worried about giving 7, though. I will admit that. Syracuse and Miami is a game to talk about in the ACC because you know what? I don't think Syracuse is a one-trick pony. This is a bowl team. We've talked very highly about the hire of Dino Babers last year, and he had his big program win last week against Clemson. Eric Dungy's got the quarterback operating the team. They've won 3 out of their last 5. Also, by the way, 4-0-1 against the spread in that 5. With the 2 losses, 8 points at NC State, 9-point loss at LSU. I mean, those are good losses. For Miami, meanwhile, they've won their last 2 games by a combined in the last combined 10 seconds of the game. All right. 17.5-point favorite in this game. Travis Homer had a big game for Walton, who's out for the year. 170 yards and a touchdown, plus a receiving touchdown. You know what? I think Syracuse is a play here at 18. No, I'm not going to go. I don't think I'm going to go. I don't think I'm going to go crazy on the 6-1 money line. Beating Clemson and Miami back-to-back would be pretty incredible. By the way, these 2 teams haven't met since they were Big East rivals. How long ago was that? 14 years ago, I think. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, I think Syracuse getting no respect there, plus 18. Speaking of ACC teams that are getting no respect and maybe should, and that is Virginia and Boston College, both playing each other. Now, Virginia's a 5.5-point favorite in this one. And you might be saying, well, why would you? I thought you were talking only about key games. But hey, Boston College beat Louisville last week. That's a nice win for them. And so they've won 2 out of the last 3. Good for them. But I wanted to mention them because of true freshman running back A.J. Dillon had 272 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns. And we know BC is a program that has produced some really good running backs. I mean, most recently, Andre Williams, who hasn't really done anything in the pros. And a lot of their running backs haven't done anything in the pros. But, you know, this is a school that produces a lot of good offensive linemen that head to the NFL. And, hey, what do? They block. They open holes for these running backs. And I guess A.J. Dillon is ready to have a big career at Boston College. They also have a kid by the name of Harold Landry, who is Dan Shonka's top senior outside linebacker edge rusher right now coming out in the NFL draft. So they've got some impact players at BC, but they don't have a quarterback. Virginia's got the better quarterback in Kurt Benkert. He's an inconsistent kid. Jordan Ellis, the running back, had his career best 136 rushing last week. You know what we think about Virginia. We've been very, very pleased with the progress of Bronco Mendenhall. And we've taken Virginia the last 2 games since the Boise game. They've won and covered both games. We're going to take them again because it's a short spread at 5. By the way, Virginia's also got some very good defensive players. Micah Kaiser at linebacker, Quinn Blanding at safety, and Andrew Brown on the defensive line. In the AAC, now the 2 teams that we've said are going to wind up playing this is to decide who plays in the AAC championship game from the East, because UCF and USF are the 2 best teams in the AAC this year, but they're both in the same division. So, but this week they have tough tests. South Florida's at Tulane. Tulane, even though they're coming off a loss, who knows? Maybe they're looking ahead. But this is Willie Fritz has got a good thing going on here in Tulane. Keep an eye on them in the coming years. They only lost by 2 to Navy. They battled hard against Oklahoma early. They crushed Tulsa and beat Army. Now South Florida, though, we've talked a lot about them recently because we have taken them the last couple of games, and they have won and blown out teams. Matter of fact, 3-0 in the AAC by a combined 137-41. But this is a game that I won't take South Florida in because, again, I think Tulane is a team that might be able to give them a little bit of a problem. Not talking about upset, but maybe make it interesting, especially since South Florida hasn't been in an interesting game since Stony Brook. Central Florida, meanwhile, is a 7.5-point road favorite at Navy. We remember when Navy beat number 6 ranked Houston last year, so they know how to win these types of games. But they had a bad game last week, 5 turnovers in the loss at Memphis. But Central Florida, just like South Florida, have been killing teams. They've won 5 games this year, all 5, by a 253-84 margin. They've covered every game. Another team that we have taken, matter of fact, I think we have gone with them, 3 straight weeks, I believe, and we've covered each time. So I'm thinking of taking them again, even though I'm a little bit apprehensive. See, I think these are 2 games that maybe Central Florida, South Florida win, probably win, but wouldn't be surprised if those were games that maybe their cover streaks come to an end. In the Mountain West Conference, tonight, Colorado State, who probably the Colorado State Boise game on November 11th will more than likely decide who will play in the Mountain West championship game, and I don't know who it'll be against. We'll get to that in a second. But Colorado State tonight at New Mexico. New Mexico State, by the way, has got some injuries they're dealing with. They have a bunch of kids on defense. Jacob Gurgle, Rashawn Epting, both looking like they're going to miss the game. They're number 2 and number 3 tacklers. And also Jalen Burrell and Stanley Barnwell are banged up as well. So New Mexico, not a good time to have defensive injuries going up against Michael Gallup, Ourlads number 3 senior wide receiver coming out of the draft. He had 3 touchdowns last week. And keep an eye on Dylan Dawkins, too. He's a little pint-sized running back who had 195 yards rushing last week and right now is a career best 6.5-yard rush average on the season. So maybe New Mexico was looking past Fresno last week. That's possible. They got destroyed in that game. But Colorado State favored by 8 here. They struggled last week. That's a very surprising, struggling situation against Navy as a 24-point favorite at home. But then again, the way all those upsets, remember all those upsets we had last week? We had 4 teams win last week that were 16-point dogs or more. So Colorado State just happy to win in a week like that. So I think makes more sense to maybe go with them this week, considering, be surprising if they have a couple of bad games in a row. Now, Wyoming plays Boise. And look, we warned you in the beginning of the season. We talked about this with Dan Shanka about how you were going to see Josh Allen struggle because all his weapons were gone. And that's exactly what's happening to him. Now, the good thing is Wyoming, after a slow start, has turned things around, especially in, look, they've only played a couple of conference games. They've won both of them, but they've won 3 straight. The only thing is they haven't beaten anybody. So now they step up and play a Boise team coming off, I think, their best win in a couple years. I mean, to go to San Diego State, the way the Aztecs have been undefeated, and the way they're playing, beating Stanford, big win. Don't get too excited, though, about the score because Boise had a couple of a punt return touchdown and a defensive touchdown. And that started the game at 14-0. And that was it. They won by 17. Now, the good thing is that a team that has struggled on offense since the bye, sophomore running back Alexander Madison, has been rushing better. 246 yards the last 2 games and 3 touchdowns. So maybe they've got something going there with the young running back because they need something. Because they lost Jeremy McNichols, the running back last year, who was just about a Mr. Weapon for them. And actually, I think they called him Mick Weapon. And then, of course, they lost their number 1 career receiver, the kid Thomas Spurbeck, lost him, and they also lost a couple other top receivers. So it's no surprise that the offense has not been very good this season for Boise State. But I don't know. I just get this feeling that Josh Allen will have one game this year that he'll win. That will mean something. And when I look at the schedule, I say, okay, it's either one of 2 games. It's either this week at Boise or in 3 weeks at home against Colorado State. Now, maybe being at home, they would have a better shot. So what I should probably do is take both games. This way, I mean, if I don't take this one and they win, I've just screwed myself. But if I take this, even if I take this one and don't get it, I can still take the Colorado State game. And if I get that one, then I'm ahead because they're almost a 5-1 dog in this game. And I'm still not sold on Boise State. I'm just not. So I'm thinking of maybe going with Wyoming in this one. Play the odds, take them in both games, win one. Have Josh Allen have one good one to bail his team out and say, okay, this is my game of the season. All right, now the other game, we talked about Fresno. We had Robert Kawada on. I interviewed him yesterday on the OFN meeting room. That's available on demand. We talked about Fresno. What a great start to the season. Jeff Tedford, Marcus McMarion, the transfer quarterback, 3-0 since he's taken over in Mountain West Conference play. But obviously, this is a big step up now against San Diego State. They're a 7.5-point dog, almost a 3-1 on the money line. But I'm riding Fresno. I'm just going to ride them, see how it goes. And then we'll go from there. Look, are they up in class? Yes. But this team has got talent. All right. This isn't some mirage situation. They've got a really good coach. They've got a quarterback that played in the Pac-12 last year at Oregon State. They've got a really good set of receivers, including Keyshawn Johnson we talked about. San Diego State does not blow out a lot of teams. Look, you got to try to stop Rashad Penny. That's what you got to do. If you can limit the damage with Rashad Penny, you can have a shot because they don't throw the ball at San Diego State very well. But I'm going to go ahead and just, let's ride Fresno because they've had a very good year this year, 4-2, straight up, 5-0-1 against the spread. So they have defied the odds all season. Okay, in the MAC, Toledo against Akron. I wanted to mention this because Akron's actually won 3 straight games and they've covered 4 straight. They beat defending MAC champion Western Michigan last week. 16.5-point spread's a lot, though, for a reason because Toledo right now is the class of the MAC. But that's a game that's probably the game of the week in the MAC. I also wanted to mention Buffalo and Miami because both teams are without their starting quarterbacks. And really feel sorry for Drew Anderson. Hopefully he'll be back next week. But Buffalo, we've gone with Buffalo like what? How many times have we gone with Buffalo now? We've taken Buffalo, 3 straight games, I believe? Yeah, I think we've taken them 3 straight games. And they've one just won, but they've covered all 3. And Drew Anderson's been fantastic. We've talked about him enough on this network. But now he's out. He got injured last week in the 1-point loss in Northern Illinois. And true freshman Kyle Van Treese came in. Didn't really play all that well. So Van Treese is going to start this week, it looks like. Looks like Anderson's out. But Gus Ragland's out for Miami. And, of course, the Miami story, which was incredible last year, lost the first 6 games of the season, won the last 6 to go to a bowl, losing by 1 point to Mississippi State. So there are a lot of high aspirations for Chuck Martin and the Redhawks this season. It just hasn't worked out. I mean, the Cincinnati loss really was the big disappointment because Cincinnati's not very good. But losing to Bowling Green, they've lost to Kent. Ragland's been out the last few weeks, so things not going well for Miami. All right, Conference USA, we've mentioned Marshall the last week or two. That's a game tonight. We like Marshall against Middle Tennessee without Stockstill again. Marshall, though, as I've said, I think that now they're looking like the team to beat. Well, for me, I definitely think they're the best team in the East without Stockstill. We'll get to the West in a second. But anyway, I like Marshall as a 2-point favorite tonight. Chase Litton has been fantastic over his last 3 starts. You take a look in those 3, especially 2 out of those 3 in conference. 9 touchdowns, no interceptions. They've won their last 4 games, the Herd, by a 108-27 margin. Middle Tennessee, meanwhile, just 3-4 on the year. Now, in the Western Division, there are a couple teams, including the team that we talked about on another interview that we had yesterday with Steve Irvine, talking Alabama Birmingham football, the color analyst for the team, and about how this could be a trap game for them. They've had a tremendous season after being out of FBS, actually being a dead program for a couple of years. But they're 7.5-point favorite in this game, but Charlotte is 0-7. So watch out for the trap there. Now, I'm going to stick with Alabama Birmingham like I have the last few weeks. Just love what they're doing, but just watch out. This could be a trap there. Spencer Brown, the freshman running back's been fantastic. And Steve Irvine thinks he's every bit as good as Jordan Howard was when he was at the program. The other game, which is really important for this division, for North Texas in the division, is North Texas at FIU. I've talked very highly, as you know, about North Texas and Seth Luttrell. I think they're going to really build something special here in a few years. They're on that pace. Sophomore quarterback Mason Fine might be one of the top. He is one of the top quarterbacks in the conference. In his last 3 games, he's almost passed for 1,000 yards with 8 touchdowns. He's got a sophomore running back in Jalen Guyton, who's having a fantastic season with 32 catches, 626, and 7 touchdowns. They had a game-winning touchdown last week against Texas San Antonio with 10 seconds left. They have won their last 3 against good, some of the better teams in the conference: UAB, Southern Miss, and Texas San Antonio. So now FAU is, of course, they play in the other conference, but Lane Kiffin has got FAU starting to play a little bit better now. And that's why they're a 3.5-point favorite over North Texas. They've won their last 2, and get this, they get Caleb Woods back. Caleb Woods has been suspended all season, 68 receptions and 934 yards last year. That's almost a 1,000-yard receiver that has not played all year for the Owls. Will finally get into play, we are told, in this game. Now, I'm going to stick with North Texas, especially since I'll be getting 4 points in this game. But look, this is a big game for FAU. I mean, FAU gets Marshall in 2 weeks on a Friday night. And if they can beat North Texas, then there's no reason to think that FAU wouldn't have a legitimate chance to actually win the Conference USA this year. That would be a very big accomplishment for Lane Kiffin. So this is a game I'm going to keep an eye on. All right, Sun Belt, this will end it. Troy and Georgia State's the only game I wanted to mention. Troy, 7.5-point favorite in this one. They lost to South Alabama last week. Now, their star running back, Jordan Chun, got hurt, but he's supposed to play this week, so there's that. Again, this is one of those situations that you probably could have seen coming. They beat LSU. They go on a bye week. Heavy favorite at home against South Alabama. Everybody's saying how great they are on campus, and then they lay a dud. And look, they're better than Georgia State. But Sean Elliott looks like he's doing a really good job there with Georgia State. They have played 4 consecutive road games, starting with a blowout at Penn State. But since the blowout at Penn State, they've won 3 straight games. And Connor Manning, the quarterback, had 446 yards passing last week, 4 touchdowns in their upset win over Louisiana Monroe. They are a little bit more than a 2-1 dog straight up in this one. But I'm going to take Georgia State. Why not? I'm going to ride what they're doing. I'm going to take the 8. I'll take the money line. I feel a little bit more comfortable with the 8, though, because Troy is a better team. But, hey, look, if Georgia State truly has something special going on here, then this is the game you want to win, because Troy is definitely one of the top teams out of the Sun Belt. By the way, Georgia State does not play Arkansas State this year. And Arkansas State looking like, besides maybe Appalachian State, they might be the best team, and Troy in the Sun Belt. All right, that'll do it. So hope you're able to digest all of that here for your pleasure for tonight's games, for all the games tomorrow. Of course, we're here every Friday to get you ready for the week in college football. Don't forget, you can check out our NFL shows on Thursday with Tony Mejia. We've got Dan Shanka every Wednesday to talk about the top prospects coming out in the NFL draft. And a whole lot of other coverage, including the next show on this network, Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, our fantasy football show with Jamal Murphy and Dan Weinrich. We'll get you ready on game day for our fantasy show right here on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. Don't forget to take a look at the depth charts at ourlads.com too. Not only college football, but the NFL. Follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN. Thanks for tuning in to the Ourlads Football Radio Network. Enjoy the games, everybody. We'll see you next time. Another scene, another package like to keep us trapped in greed.